Hey, Reverend Kim here from Marshfield United Methodist Church. Haven't seen you in a while. We've been recording on Sunday mornings and using that for the streams. You're going to see a lot of changes this year as Maggie Melvin steps up and starts doing some of our video production stuff with me and with Nick, our tech director. And eventually, when Nick graduates from grad school, Maggie will be taking over as tech director. So we're kind of leading her through the process of all of this video stuff. It is good to be with you. I look forward to seeing more of you, or I don't know, letting you see more of me up close again this year. Let's see. Have a very, very happy new year. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the streams.
This is a reading of scripture from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. They were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
So if you weren't here on Christmas Eve, or you've thought about something else since then, let me catch you up on the long story I'm telling in this series in 3 parts. We're in the middle part. I was in Italy with Jay's dad before we got married. He goes by Ale in Italy, and so did most of his friends. They all had the same name and the same nickname. I took a day trip with them to a place called Alba. This is Alba, which is known for its food and its wine. And I was the only one in that SUV who was not named Ale. They told me they would take me to a slow food restaurant, but first, we went to the Truffle Expo. Now, when I say truffle, you probably think, but most foodies will probably think this, which is the most common kind of truffle in the world, the black truffle. But when you say truffle to Italians, they think this. This is the tartufo bianco d'Alba, or the white truffle of Alba. It's the rarest, most fragrant truffle in the world. It cannot be cultivated. You cannot create its growing conditions. It must grow naturally underground at the roots of certain hardwood trees where truffles have grown before. People who hunt them must have a license. Did you hear that? Well, Mark's not here. I was going to tell Mark he could get a truffle hunting license. Although traditionally pigs were used to hunt them, now they have to use dogs because pigs eat the truffles. And they're so rare. Before they're prepped for eating, they look like little clods of dirt, but they were displayed under glass at the Truffle Expo like they were rare gems. That's the Truffle Expo. That's what that looks like. And they are expensive. single prize-size truffles that are like a pound are now sold for over $100,000. And the small one, Ale bought, had a price tag with a comma in it. A comma. And I was aghast. You know, I was trying not to show my Missouri because that is not even food. That is an ingredient. To make food, that is fungi. So when he bought it, the seller went through this really precious process of covering it up to keep it safe, you know, bagging it and then putting it in a tough little container and then wrapping it with tape and then putting it in another bag. And we wanted to hide that there was a truffle in this bag, except outside the bag said Truffle Expo. It was pretty obvious. And we took it immediately to the car where it was placed in the back inside a styrofoam cooler that had been brought just for this. And then they wrapped the styrofoam cooler with packing tape. And I thought, what is the truffle gonna do? Like, does the truffle have an escape plan? Do we have to be careful not to feed it after midnight? Like, this is really weird. So then we drove to dinner with some of Ale's friends at the slow food restaurant, which was picturesquely located in a vineyard in Alba, outside in the countryside. There was no menu. They brought you whatever they cooked that day, all 10 courses. Ugh. And it had all been made slowly from scratch, but you didn't have any choices. And then 2 of the young women got up to go to the restroom, and then only one of them came back, and she whispered to the other women, and then 2 more went to the bathroom to check on her. And although we got there when the restaurant opened, we were there until it closed. Because one of the women had a touch of something that kept her in the bathroom for hours with all of her friends. I don't understand. Like, when I have gastrointestinal emergencies, I don't really want to be surrounded in the bathroom with all of my friends. But this was apparently what they did when they went out. Like, the women went and hung out in the bathroom. So, lucky for me, while all the women except for me, I was not allowed to use the bathroom. While they were all hanging out in the bathroom, one of their boyfriends, who had visited America exactly one time for a short time, entertained the whole table with proclamations about life in the US that were 100% incorrect. I've never met anyone who drew more incorrect conclusions, nor anyone who said them with such authority. It was like the old style Yakov Smirnoff, you know, who used to say, in America, you break the law. In Soviet Russia, the law break you. So he said stuff like that about America and Italy, except none of it was funny and none of it was accurate. And I think some American had maybe just gotten their kicks by lying to him and telling him crazy stories about America, and this guy believed it. So he talked for hours, and Ale and I just stood there we just sat there shaking our heads and wondering if this was the reason all the women in this friends group spent the whole night in the bathroom every time they went out. So when we got kicked out of the restaurant after 5 hours, I was all peopled out. I was particularly Italian peopled out. I was done with them, and I just brought up the rear of the group as we ambled toward the pair of cars we had arrived in. And when Ale opened the door to his SUV, everyone around it started to cough. And the smell coming from inside that SUV, yes, it was uniquely awful. It was uniquely awful. It smelled like the world's strongest mushroom had a baby with overripe garlic. And then that baby got sick on a pile of wet dirt. I'm sorry, that is as nice as I could make it. It smelled horrendous. You've heard things called pungent. This was pungent. It was bad. And I said very naively, what is that smell? And the 2 male Ales told me it was the truffle. as all of the other people with us piled into a Fiat 500 like it was a clown car. I mean, everybody extra got in that car and they took off, leaving us alone, the three of us, with this truffle stunk up car. No amount of layers can protect you from a truffle that has been off-gassing for 6 hours in a confined space. So we stood in the cold waiting for the smell to dissipate, but of course he had the car running. And so the truffle was getting warmer and it was smelling worse. And so Ale, the car owner, reaches across into his glove box, and before we can stop him, he's taken out Bulgari for Men, and he has doused his entire car with it. Like when I sat in my seat, it was wet with that. So now it smells like overly fragrant man and mushroom and garlic and dirt and decay and a loss of hope. And that's why we drove an hour or so into Torino in 32-degree weather with our heads down, with our heads sticking out of our open windows, gagging and singing All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey in October. Why did this happen? Why did we go to Alba to a truffle expo? Why did we buy $1,000 stink bomb? Why did we put it in the car? Why did we have to stay in the restaurant all those hours with that man who knew nothing about America? Why? It was awful. Why? That's a whole day of my life I can't get back. And the easy answer is this: because Ale's dad loved truffle, and he had Alzheimer's disease. And the best way to give him a very good day was to give him a food memory, to give him really something special to eat. And that's why we went to Alba, to bring him a memory. That's why we bought this expensive stink bomb. But still, it was a stinky gift. You know, it was a stinky, stinky gift. You ever get one of those? Jesus did. He was a baby. In come the wise men, and they open up their chests to give him gold and frankincense and myrrh. The use for gold is obvious. The use for frankincense, well, it was an incense for the holy places. And the use for myrrh was to embalm the dead. They were all precious gifts, but two of them were known for their smell. Now, a couple years ago, we hired a new custodian, and she had this great idea. She said, I'm going to buy essential oil of frankincense and myrrh, and I'm going to spray the sanctuary with it every time I clean, and then the sanctuary will smell like Jesus. And I said, that's cute. You should try that and see how that smells. Nope. It smelled bad. It smelled really bad. Those things do not smell great, frankincense and myrrh. She did it 1 week and then wisely stopped. So these guys have come a long way to find Jesus, to find the promised Messiah, following a star in the sky to the newborn king. And all we know is that they brought gifts. And all the gifts were valuable. 2 of them still kind of stunk. Have you ever gotten a stinky gift? I've had some. Clinical depression in my college years was a pretty stinky gift. I didn't ask for it. I didn't know what it was. I was embarrassed when I found out that's what it was, and I struggled really, really hard to get rid of it without regifting it. But you know what? Now, I understand people better when they struggle with mental illness. And that's a pretty good gift. It stunk, but it's a pretty good gift. For some reason, I was given a little too much empathy in my brain, which has led me to let people into my life that really didn't need to be there, which has led to struggle, but it's also led to having to learn to set and keep boundaries so that everyone is where they need to be and I can still be myself. That overabundance of empathy has sometimes been a pretty stinky gift, but it's been something I've had to learn to balance, and it's helped me in my job. And so have the boundaries I had to learn about to keep my empathy in check in action. And speaking of my job, for honestly, for years, I would have told you that the worst gift I ever got was my call to ministry. I thought it was the worst gift God could have given me. That is not what I wanted to do with my life. I did not feel like I got to choose. I like choices at restaurants, careers, whatever. I like choices. I studied political science. I'd interviewed for a PhD program in ethnomathematics. I took the LSAT. I had decided I was going to go to law school. And God was like, here's a little present I've been holding on to since your baptism. It's a call to ministry. So I went to seminary instead, and I fell in love with the Hebrew scriptures, which was a surprise. And I worked in a church, and I loved that, and that was a surprise. And I accepted my first couple of appointments, but I didn't love it like I do now. I didn't love it. I wished I could make a bigger difference. It felt kind of futile, and it was exhausting. And I started daydreaming about working at a bank so I could go home at night and not have to think about my clients. And I started thinking about law school again, and I bought another LSAT prep guide. Now, this was back before I became boring. This was when I was interesting. And one of my parishioners invited me to go somewhere with him and his best friends. His friends weren't going to any church then. He thought, well, if they meet my pastor, they'll see that pastors can be real people. Maybe they'll try church. Plus, I was entertaining back then outside of church. And at one point in the evening, I was left alone with this new friend. And he told me that he really admired what I did for a living. That he sometimes wished that he, like many of the people in his family, had gone into ministry. He said, I wish I could end my days as satisfied with what I did as you must end yours. Because he said, my work is exhausting and it just feels futile. I cannot make a difference. And I asked him what he did for a living. He was an attorney. And I shared with him my similar feelings about his line of work. And as we held this deep discussion about our mutually admired career paths, I began to appreciate that God had made my call to ministry really clear. Because, at the end of the day, even when I was dissatisfied with it, I knew I was doing the right thing for me. And I still thought and think this guy makes a difference in his particular law practice. But I realized that he was much unhappier than I was. And that there, but for the grace of God, went I, right? I stopped struggling with the call and saw it for the gifts that God had given me through it. Sometimes we have to struggle in our lives. Following Jesus is not a get out of struggle free card. You're going to struggle just as much as everybody else. Sometimes we have to struggle. And sometimes we find ourselves asking, why? Why does it have to be like this? Why do I have to go through this? Why is God doing this to me? And I am not the pastor who is going to call your struggles a test or a trial. I don't think God gives us the hard stuff to see what we'll do. I don't think we're Job. I think the world and the people in it are sufficient an obstacle course without divine intervention. But I do think that in whatever struggle the world gives us, God will create a gift for us from it. God will turn something out in it for our good. We will take something good away that we need. Our struggles will teach us to be kinder, or they will teach us to listen more softly, to connect with others we wouldn't have connected with. And that's kind of what I mean by stinky gifts. Struggles that God turns into gifts that help us live our lives as better disciples of Jesus Christ. Not truffles, though, they just stink. Next week, I'll tell you about what it was like to have to eat them for 3 days. Frankincense and myrrh stink too, but they signified the holiness of the child and provided for even his after-death care. They were good gifts. Those stinky gifts were gifts fit for a king and a harbinger of who he would be and how he would live his life. You know, stinky up front, struggle in the middle, gifts in the end. That's how all of my gifts have gone. And I bet you have received some stinky gifts too. Some hardship that felt like trials, some ridiculously awful situations that felt like God was testing you. And I bet if you can look back on those struggles, when you can look back on those struggles, you will be able to see gifts from God. Stinky gifts even. All you may need is a shift in your perspective to see the gifts that came from the struggle. As we wrap up this year and you think back on what it's been like, as you start to think about the next year beginning and all you've gone through in your life and how you want next year to go, I invite you to think over those stinky gifts you have received in your life and how you might use them to lead your life as a disciple of Jesus Christ. Let us pray. God, you give us great gifts. You gave us each other. You gave us the skills and talents we have, as well as the calls you lead us to follow. You also stand with us whenever we struggle through whatever the world throws our way, and you turn our struggles into gifts for the future. You make us more adaptable all the time. Help us at the end of this year, as we look back, as we look forward, know you're present at our sides in our present, and that you will give meaning to even our stinkiest gifts. Amen.